ado, I welcome Professor Abdul Kumar. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moniz. Let me at the outset wish all of you a very happy Teachers' Day. It's a very important day, as you are aware, and I'm very glad that today we are doing this particular lecture. On behalf of the Northeast Study Center, I have great pleasure in welcoming our esteemed speakers, Ms. Patricia Mukhim, who has been formerly the member of National Security Advisory Board, and she has been obviously writing for Ceylon Times, and Dr. Amarjeet Singh, who is currently the Professor of Northeast Studies at Jamia Millia Islamia. It gives me extreme pleasure to welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, for agreeing to deliver his presidential address despite his busy schedule. Sir, we welcome you on behalf of the center. And I welcome all our distinguished invitees, Sri P.M. Heblikar-ji, he is there. I am sure Sri Dr. Oza-ji has joined, Mr. G.K. Pillai, Sri Sadri Chari-ji, all of them have joined to this discussion meeting. We are really very glad that they have been able to find time for our interaction this morning. I welcome all my colleagues and more importantly, our dear students, because this is going to be a very good learning experience for all of us, the faculty and the students, from two of our esteemed speakers, who is going to speak on a very important theme, Naga peace negotiations. Before I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor to make his remarks, I request Dr. Moniz Tongbaum, the coordinator of Northeast Study Center, to introduce him formally.
Thank you, sir. It is my pleasure to introduce our Honorable Vice Chancellor. Our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, graduated from Mysore Medical College in 1978 and was commissioned in the Army Medical Corps in 1979. He acquired his MS ENT from Mumbai University in 1986. Besides being a very well-known ENT surgeon, he has contributed significantly in the field of medical education, having trained generations of undergraduate and postgraduate students in the Armed Forces Medical College AFMC Pune. He served the Armed Forces for 38 years, during which, besides academic appointments, he has also held very important administrative appointments and is credited with many achievements. Dr. Venkatesh has been a member of a number of high-level committees and is a recipient of a number of honors and awards, including the prestigious Vishish Seva Medal by the President of India. After serving the Armed Forces Medical Services for 38 years, Dr. Venkatesh joined as the Vice Chancellor of Sikkim Manipal University on July 1, 2017 and completed his 3-year term successfully on June 30, 2020. During his tenure, he has contributed immensely to the development and improvements in infrastructure, academic processes, and IT infrastructure of Sikkim Manipal University. He has displayed inspiring leadership qualities and team building skills during his tenure and as Vice Chancellor, and under his tenure, Sikkim Manipal University has achieved the recognition as a leading private university in the country. We welcome you, sir, to the Northeast Studies Center at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. Thank you, sir.
So very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So may I request you, sir, for delivering your address?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Distinguished speakers for the day, Ms. Patricia Mukhim, Professor Amarjeet Singh, distinguished guests invited for today's function, Sri P.M. Heblikar-ji, Sri Sheshadri Chari-ji, Sri Jitendra Oza-ji, Sri G.K. Pillai-ji, and Sri Alok Mohan-ji. All the delegates who are part of this scheduled program for the day, which is of great significance. The topic for discussion today has been very well chosen and very relevant and perhaps less discussed in this part of the country. That is the Naga peace negotiations, the way ahead. And a very, very happy Teachers' Day to all of you. Today, as we remember Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, our former president, on whose memory the Teachers' Day is being celebrated, we, all the academicians, should go ahead with reverence to that great philosopher, President of Government of India. It gives me immense pleasure to address the students, the faculty, esteemed speakers, and participants who have joined us from outside the institution during this timely and very relevant discussion on the pertinent issue impacting peace and development in India's Northeast. It is heartening to see the Northeast Study Center of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations to be taking such initiatives on understanding the varying dimensions and complexities of the issue impacting northeastern region of India. There seems to be a lack of holistic and balanced knowledge of the states comprising of the Northeast and the issues affecting the region. The Northeast, comprising of the 7 sister states and Sikkim, has multiple facets that needs to be studied and disseminated to the larger public in a nuanced manner. I am pleased to note that the Northeast Study Center has been making sincere efforts in this regard since its inception, and I hope the center will continue to strive towards this noble effort. The theme for today's discussion, the Naga peace negotiation, the way forward, is indeed an extremely important one for the overall prospect of peace and development in the entire region. Armed ethnic insurgencies have not only posed a security threat, but also negatively affected the ways and means in which potential can be realized and capacity can be built in the region. The Naga insurgency, largely spearheaded by NSCN-IM, has been one of the largest and the longest running insurgencies, and there has been constant efforts by the Government of India to establish some understanding and build consensus towards political resolutions. The peace talks with the Indian government interlocutors have seen its share of inherent contradictions and opportunities for breakthroughs. As one can see through a number of assessments and analysis on the issue, there's a number of roadblocks seem to have come up on the road to peace and how some understanding can be brought on this extremely sensitive and difficult issue. This remains a part of the discourse. To discuss and help us understand the various dimensions and nuances of the Naga peace process, negotiations, and the way ahead, I'm extremely pleased that the Northeast Center has brought 2 of the most well-known experts in the field as their invited speakers for the day. I have no doubt that this discussion will enlighten us further in terms of gaining some useful insights on this pertinent, important theme. As an armed forces personnel, I had in my younger formative years, I had the honor and pleasure of serving in the Northeast. In 1980-81, I had a tenure in Sikkim, and from Sikkim, I had a 2-year tenure in Mizoram at the peak of its insurgency. And I've seen the turmoil, the conflict, and how it is affecting the day-to-day life of the people staying in the northeastern states. Sikkim, of course, was a very peaceful state, but we did have a lot of trouble in the Northeast in those days. And I had the opportunity to revisit the Northeast recently in the last 5 years. And then I've seen what a dramatic change that has occurred in the entire Northeast. It's been a really, it's a pleasure to see the changes and the acceptance and total integration of the entire population of Northeast into the government, into India. And as I see more and more students and employees are coming into the central part of India and becoming central to the development of the country. Conflicts have never helped anybody. And the armed conflicts and insurgencies have been a direct result of lack of development and lack of understanding of the people's mind and the way things they look at and what they want and what they are getting. And the disenchantment leads to conflict. And this continues, and some adversaries and take advantage of the situation and fuel the insurgency process. So, I'm convinced that in all these places we have seen all over the world, wherever there have been armed insurgencies, peace has only come with development. military solutions have never been a permanent solution to armed insurgencies. It has to be total acceptance of the people, and they feel safe and integrated only when they get what rest of the country or rest of the regions are getting, and where there is sustainable development and a sense of pride and happiness with being part of a certain system of governance. So I compliment Dr. Arvind Kumar and his team of Department of Geopolitics and International Relations for conceptualizing this webinar. I find this is a very, very interesting and very important webinar, and I'm sure that this event will be an enriching experience to all of us to hear the illustrious and distinguished faculty on the subject of Naga peace negotiations, the way ahead. I wish the event all the success, and I eagerly look forward to hearing to our distinguished speakers for the day. Once again, warm greetings from Manipal Academy of Higher Education on this day, and I wish the event all the success once again. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for your remarks. I think it was very useful and very comprehensive. Now, Manish, you can moderate the session.
Thank you very much, sir, for the opportunity, and thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, for your remarks. That's, I think, has really set the grounds for the discussion to continue. And it is my pleasure to welcome two very well-known speakers in this field whose work in different dimensions
We can't hear Monish. Monish has gone out. Hello?
Hello, Monish.
Monish, we can't hear Monish anymore.
He's gone off the screen too. Perhaps he's rejoining.
Oh.
Are we back? Yes. I entered through my. So it's a technical glitch in the digital connectivity. Starting again, it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce the first speaker of the session, Ms. Patricia Mukhim, who is currently editor the Shillong Times, one of the oldest English language diaries in the northeastern region of India. She has been on the National Security Advisory Board of Government of India and engaged extensively on issues beyond military security. Ms. Mukhim has been a gender activist and authored a book, Waiting for an Equal World, which looks at gender concerns in India's Northeast. She regularly writes on issues related to the region for the national media, and Ms. Mukhim is a recipient of several journalistic awards, and including the Padma Shri from the Government of India. Thank you, ma'am. The floor is yours now.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know why I've gone off the screen.
Just wait, ma'am. I will fix this.
There is some problem, it seems.
Yeah. Very unstable, no?
Yeah, now you are coming, madam. Please go ahead.
Hello? Oh my God. Okay, I'll just go ahead. Huh? I think it's important to hear than to see. So the Naga peace talks seem to have hit a storm, and we are not sure which way it is going to go. But I think we need to look at history to understand why we have come to this point. From the very beginning, we have used words such as Naga national workers, etc., to define the gun-toting so-called, fighters for Naga sovereignty. Over the years, however, things have changed, and the so-called Naga national workers have developed a vested interest in ending the status quo. They now are so deeply involved in an illegal parallel economy that they just want to continue with that. And they have a strong hold on the state government, which makes things even worse. And all of us who regularly comment or write on the issues of Nagaland are given monikers such as agents of the IB, agents of the government of India. So I think it's high time now that people start speaking up, and these people who speak up should actually be from Nagaland. For a long time, nobody could speak up because of the fear of the gun. I think it was only after the year 2000 that a young generation of Nagas who were coming up, who were entrepreneurial, and who found it very difficult to survive in the business atmosphere as it is happening in Nagaland, that began to speak up. And it is sad, though, that those who are in academics actually tend to toe the line of the Naga national workers. Very few of them actually speak, the truth as it should be spoken. Now, why have successive peace talks failed between the Nagas or the NSCN-IM and the government of India? First of all, it is because the stakeholders, the main stakeholders, which is the civil society groups and the people of Nagaland, have never been included. I think for the first time, the interlocutor, Mr. R.N. Ravi, has involved several different groups and has given voice to their concerns. He is perhaps the first interlocutor who did not hold talks outside the country. I think it was very, very grounded, invited a whole lot of people with different stakes to come and make their voices heard. So that itself has created a sense of, insecurity in the only negotiating group, the NSCN-IM. And so the word Naga itself is very misleading. It is a forced nomenclature for groups with different tribal loyalties. On the surface, it looks like it's an acceptable word, but at the core, it's very problematic, because if you say Naga, it includes the Nagas of Manipur, and one doesn't see any common ground or a convergence of views between the Nagas of Manipur and the Nagas of Nagaland. And this is coming out even more, vehemently in these troubled times. So if we are talking of a settlement for the Naga people, then the views of the people of Nagaland need to be taken a little more seriously. And those views are now coming out in the form of letters to the Prime Minister. Recently, the Nagaland Gaumbura Federation appealed to the Prime Minister of India to sign the political solution for Nagaland at the earliest by September this year. And they have said that they no longer want to wait. And they have also stated very firmly that they have full faith in the present interlocutor, Mr. R.N. Ravi, and this whole thing about changing interlocutors is becoming more of a customary gesture on the part of the NSA and IM. And the Naga Gaumburas Federation have also said that the only surviving member of the Naga People's Convention, the NPC, Mr. S.C. Jamir, should be made witness to this agreement that is to be signed between Government of India and the people of Nagaland to give sanctity to the new agreement, because the present agreement, they say, will have an overriding effect on the 16-point agreement. So again, this council, the reason I'm quoting this council is because it is a very inclusive council. It's not like the Naga Ho-Ho, which is now being seen as the overground voice of the NSA and IM. So the people of Nagaland still hold a lot of respect for the Gaumburas, and that it comes at this point of time, I think is very, very important and needs to be considered by the government of India. And they have said that without physical integration, there cannot be any compromise on the territorial and political integrity of Nagaland. And they have also stated this, and this I think is very important. They have said that the framework agreement of August 3rd, 2014, was to serve the internal purposes of the NSA and IM, rather than for the good of the Nagas or the people of the country. So these things coming at this juncture would suggest that there is a lot of going back on previous agreements or previous talks held between Government of India and former interlocutors. And this group has actually virtually trashed the Naga Ho-Ho, saying it no longer represents the interests of the Nagas. And they are, stating in so many words that they want a settlement once and for all. Now, the point about the contentious points as far as the Nagas are concerned is that after the settlement, it appears that NSA and IM want large parts of that Intanki reserved forest so that they can accommodate their cadres there. And the majority of their cadres are from Manipur. Now, this is not acceptable to the people of Nagaland and has been a bone of serious contention. Then there are 4 Naga tribes from Manipur who are seeking domicile in Nagaland. That also is another bone of contention. So we have those of us who've been following this whole peace process right from 1997, we have seen that it has brought a lot of social fragmentation. There have been internecine conflicts, and as a result, no private sector can thrive or emerge in Nagaland. Even the public sector too is heavily extorted, so it cannot survive. And as a result, there are no jobs for the young Nagas who are coming up by leaps and bounds. Most of them have had to leave the state to seek employment outside. And this is not acceptable to the younger generation of Nagas. The state of education, health, and even roads are in such poor condition because most of the funds are diverted either into private pockets or into the pockets of the armed groups. So the whole distribution of public goods is distorted in Nagaland. As a result, the public trust in leaders, in the government, has been also eroded. And because of the conflict, resources have been diverted away from being used for optimal economic uses. This has obstructed growth and development, and anyone who visits Nagaland will see that only a few in Dimapur and in Kohima have benefited from the governance system. the money that has been sent or spent by government of India has not been accounted for. And this is very problematic, and all because you are in a state of conflict, and so you have the alibi that you're using money to contain conflict. I think a time has come when the truth must be told, and I'm very happy that the Gaumbura Federation has spoken its mind, and I hope that many other groups, civil society groups also speak up, because it's time to take ownership of the peace talks and not to allow it to be dictated by just one armed group. I think with this, I will stop here and then maybe share other things a little later.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for talking your mind. As always, I have known you, and laying bare some of the complexities that have afflicted the prospects of this peace negotiation, and also the inclusiveness or the lack of inclusiveness hitherto that you have so minutely pointed out. And one of the things that I would like to pick up perhaps the discussion would be that your presentation, I think, very very importantly brought out that there is this notion of there is a periphery, there could be a periphery in the periphery, and as you were talking about, only a few in Dimapur and Kohima having benefited, and not the not the way it should be. So I think this idea of periphery within the periphery, or marginalized within the marginalized, is something that I really would love to discuss as we proceed towards the discussion. Thank you very much, ma'am. Now I have the privilege of inviting and introducing the next speaker, Dr. M. Amarjeet Singh. He's a professor and an executive director, Center for Peace Studies, New Delhi, where he teaches courses on social conflict and society and politics of India's Northeast. He has previously worked with the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, now called the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi, and the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bengaluru. He has written extensively on conflict studies, identity politics, and migration studies, and has edited several books, including Identity, Contestation, and Development in India's Northeast, Northeast India and India's Active Policy, Identifying the Priorities, Understanding Urbanization in Northeast India, Issues and Challenges, and a forthcoming volume on autonomy and democratic governance. It's a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Singh. The floor is yours now.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, because sometimes my you see my name is not there. Actually, I'm using my daughter's laptop, so my name is not there. So please excuse me for that. And there was some problem in the beginning. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm very thankful to the Manipal Institute for inviting me, and I have associated with your institute when I was at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, and it's very it's a very happy moment for me to be with your institute. So thank you very much for inviting me. So now we have heard the first speaker have spoken very nicely about the issues of the Naga insurgency. Now let me add some points, and I'll be just sticking to about, say, 5-6 points. So now let me start by saying that in the Northeast, we have seen several peace accords, the peace agreement. And what is very unique, or what is very interesting, is that now, apart from all this peace accord, we have came across the so-called Mizo Accord. We have seen 3 agreements the Bodos have signed with the government of India and the government of Assam. And likewise, so far we have seen about 4 to 5 agreements, or the so-called peace accords with the Nagas. So now in all these agreements, there are basic differences between all these agreements. Say, for example, when the Mizo Accord was signed in 1985, that was a very different, because at that time there was only one, the Mizo insurgent organizations. There was no any other opposition. There was no opposition from other, states or the, neighboring, areas. So as a result of that, the peace accord went out well, and then now today Mizoram is relatively peaceful. So then, and somewhat different again is the various Bodo Accords. As of now, we have seen 3 Bodo Accords, the so-called peace accord. So the Bodos, they wanted separate state. So in 1993, first agreement was signed with the government of India. After some time, the experiment failed. Then in due course of time, another agreement was signed with one of the very powerful insurgent organization, the Bodo Liberation Tigers. But the other group opposed the agreement. So with that led to the, the formation of, a district level autonomy in the, in 4 districts in Assam, which is today known as the Bodo Territorial Area District. Then after, say, another, recently in 2020, another agreement was signed by various Bodo insurgents factions and the government of India. And we don't know what is going to happen. So now why I am bringing is this, when these agreements were being signed, the context in which these agreements signed, these agreements are signed or were signed differ from one conflict situation to another conflict situations. So like in the Mizo, Mizo Accord, and then in the Bodo Accord, and now what is very, very interesting in the case of the Naga insurgency, which I have been saying, for on number of occasions, is that it's a very, very unfortunate movement. The Naga insurgency has been going on for so many years, and this is the one of the oldest insurgent, the oldest movement in the Northeast, not only in the Northeast, but also outside the Northeast. And it's a very, very unfortunate movement, as I have said in the beginning. Now we have came across and we have witnessed, or we have, we have came across at least about, say, 4 peace accords that has been signed with the Nagas, say in 1947, in 1960, in 1975, and then very recently, and in another agreement in 2015. What is why I said very unfortunate is that, whenever an agreement, in the case of Nagas, whenever an agreement is signed, then the problem, instead of solving the problem indeed intensifies. So I'll give you why I say this is. Now, let me just go back to a little bit of history. So the first Naga Accord, or the agreement with the Nagas, so that was signed before India's independence in June 1947, and that was for the the administration and for the protection of culture and other of the Nagas in the Naga Hills districts of Assam. So that agreement was signed. And unfortunately, what had happened was that immediately after the agreement was signed, there was a problem in the interpretation of the wording in the, in that agreement, because the Nagas interpreted that agreement that because the validity of that agreement was 10 years. After 10 years, the Nagas can decide, what they can, they can do. So that clause became very, very, and that was interpreted by the Nagas thinking that that gives them, some kind of, they can ask for independence. And whereas the other side, the India government says that, it is not something like that. So with that, the first agreement, the 1947, so it could not lead to anything. So it collapsed. Then after independence, and then the Naga insurgency started, and then in about a decade or so, so an agreement was signed in 1960, and this agreement led to the formation of the state of Nagaland. So at that time, the Naga Hills districts of Assam was there. So with this agreement, the Nagaland state came into existence. And what is very, very interesting is that, in any kind of, negotiation between the, various conflicting group or the opposition group, say maybe between the government and the opposition armed groups, it's a negotiation, it's a bargaining process. Okay, and in this kind of situation, government is always in the disadvantaged situations. So likewise in the case of the Nagas. So therefore the government decides whom to be included and whom to be excluded. So in the 1950s and the 60s, and at that time, the Naga insurgency was led by the Naga National Council. That was one of the prominent insurgent organizations. But when the agreement was signed in 1960, the government did not sign the agreement with the Naga National Councils. The government signed the agreement with some other, individuals or the groups. So the Naga National Council was left out. And the Naga National Council was not part of that agreement. So as a result of that, the Naga National Council rejected that agreement that led to the emergence of Nagaland. So this is something, and then after the creation of Nagaland, the problem could not be resolved. And then there was lots of efforts at peace building and then peace talks, and that did not succeed very well. And then after some time in 1975, another agreement was signed with very expected confusion. That was a very confused accord. An agreement was signed with a faction of Nagas who claimed to be the representative of underground organizations. So that was the problem. So, and this agreement was signed. You see, when an agreement is signed between the government and the opposition groups, so there are various, clauses and various, you see large number of agreement that has been signed. If you read, many of these agreements are today publicly available. And if you read all these agreements, there are some things which the government offered to these XYZ, groups or the, the movement. So what the government can do, like that. So there are, but if you look at in the case of this 1975, it was a very unclear, very confusing, agreement in which it says that the insurgents will accept the Constitution of India, they will surrender arms, they will, but it did not specify what the government will be giving to the so-called, the opposition group. So that was a very, very unclear one. And then after many years, again in 2015, another agreement was signed. We don't know what was the, of course, it was in the social media. We don't know what is the actual content of this agreement. But going by this, the framework agreement, it was not a peace accord. Because when we talk about, as a student of political science, when we talk about peace accord, normally peace accord can be divided into various categories. Say, as for example, full peace accord, partial peace accord, or the peace process accord. So now this framework agreement falls somewhere the peace process accord that laid down the framework for future agreement. So therefore, it was a very, very unclear, and so therefore now, so this was the, and so despite of all this, agreement that has been signed in the case of the Nagas. Now we all know that everybody knows that instead of solving the problem, it indeed intensified the problem. Say, as for example, in 1960, the agreement was signed. After that, the Naga National Council became more stronger. Again, in 1975, another agreement was signed. That agreement led to the split in the the Naga National Council, and that led to the what is today known as the National Socialist Council of Nagaland. Of course, this is also have been divided. So now this is what we have seen, you know. So now so many accords, and then so this is why I'm bringing at the the other accords like the Meso Accord. Say as for example the Mizo Accord. Say as for example when the government of India signed the Mizo Accord, there was only one Mizo insurgent organizations. So there was no much problem. There was no opposition from other states or other. So and likewise in the case of the Bodos also in 1993, the government of India signed an agreement with some factions. Again in 2003, another agreement was signed with one main group. Again in 2020, another agreement was signed with all the factions. So this is, but in the case of the NSC, in the case of the Nagas, it is not so happening. So it is very, very divided, I must say. So now to continue, what I will say is that now if you look at, if you ask me what is the aim and the purpose of today's, the Naga movement. Now it's a very, very it's a complicated as the previous speaker has also highlighted, you know. So now there is a complication in identifying the aims of the Naga movement. Now if you ask anybody, so it's a very, very complicated, because you see we all know that when the Naga insurgency started, the demand was of course for the creation of an independent homeland. Then over the period of time, what we have seen is that apart from this the independent movement, there is also the issue of the integration of so-called Naga inhabited areas into one political and administrative unit. So, and even this integration of Naga areas, say for example in the 50s and the 60s, the integration of Naga areas was not only of the Naga areas in the territory of India, but also those who are inhabiting in the other areas, say as for example in Myanmar. So therefore now the issue of this independent movement, then the integration of the Naga areas into one political and administrative units. So this is the problem. So therefore now if you ask what is the actual goal and aim of the Naga insurgency today, is that it's a very, very difficult, because we have still the goal transformation. There is a shift in their aims and objective, and that is also not very, very clear. So therefore in this kind of situation, and now you see every insurgent movement in the Northeast, and especially to the Naga insurgency movement, as we all know that it's a very, very faction reading. There are various subgroups and there are various groups. So therefore we can see that there is a problem of goal conflict and goal ambiguity. So we have seen what I will call as goal transformation, and today is that goal conflict and the goal ambiguity. So therefore it is very, very unclear. So now before I conclude, so I will add some other the other point. Now when the Naga, you see, during the time of when the Constitution Assembly debate were going on, at that time there was a discussion about the autonomy for the hill areas of the then Assam, because the Naga Hills district was also part of Assam at that time. So there was one of the suggestions. Now some of you must be hearing or knowing about the so-called sixth schedule in some of the states in the northeast. Say, for example, in Assam, there are, the so-called sixth schedule areas. So, say, or for that matter, in the hill areas of Tripura, or in some areas in Mizoram, and then in some, in Meghalaya too. So now this sixth schedule provide some kind of district level autonomy, and especially in the hill areas when it was started. So now we all know that in the 1940s till the 1950s, the government, the idea of sixth schedule actually started with the Naga in order to resolve the Naga movement, but the Nagas rejected. But now today in 2020, so now, as I have said in the beginning, it's a very, very unfortunate movement that had started in the early 1940s, have demanded various so aims and objectives, having independent homeland, then integration of Naga areas. But whereas the government of India at the time in 1940s or in the 50s were willing to give them district level autonomy. So instead of the district level autonomy, in due course of time, the Nagaland state came into existence. So now the question is, this speaker has also very highlighted, is that now the issue of the Nagas inhabited outside the state of Nagaland. So this is also a very, very so therefore now you see there are Nagas in Nagaland, there are Nagas in Assam also, there are Nagas in say Nagaland, and at the same time there are Nagas in Myanmar. So therefore it's a very confusing situation if you really ask at what is the actual aims and objectives. Now then when this all this peace process when the current peace process between the NSA and IM started in 1997, there was a discussion. Many people started writing, many people have written, lots of discussion took place, what they call it giving cultural autonomy to the Nagas, means non-territorial cultural autonomy to the Nagas. So that was also an issue that was debated, discussed again and again. And even today also sometimes this issue has come up, giving cultural autonomy to all the Nagas, irrespective of whether they are in Nagaland or Manipur or in say Assam or like that, non-territorial cultural autonomy. So this has also been discussed on several forums, and many people, many scholars and many intellectuals have written on this. But again, there is a problem on the issue of cultural autonomy in the case of the Nagas, is because the churches, you see, if you go to anywhere in the Naga inhabited areas in Nagaland or Manipur or in Myanmar or in Assam or in Arunachal Pradesh, the church have already played a very, very important role. The church, they look after, runs school, colleges, medical, institutions, so healthcare facilities and like that. So therefore, in that kind of situation, now the issue of cultural autonomy has come into conflict with the already established roles and function of the church. So now to conclude, so now one of the issue, as I have highlighted, is the integration of Naga areas. So I am not going to talk about the Nagas in Myanmar, but I am talking about the integration of the Naga inhabited areas. They call it Naga areas of India, that is Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, and Manipur. So this has been one of the issue that has been now the focus seems to be on the integration of Naga areas. But this is also very, very difficult. It's very difficult because you see, if you look at the State Reorganization Commission report of 1955, it clearly states that when the states are being reorganized, one of the criteria that is required is the consensus among the various communities. But now the problem in the case of the integration of the Naga areas into a single political unit or a administrative unit is the opposition from the neighboring states, say Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, and Manipur. But the main opposition comes from the state of Manipur. So this is the one of the biggest, the Manipur issue is very complex, and you see, and it's a stumbling block in the in the settlement of the Naga issue. And even you see, as I have said, as the previous speaker has also said about, the Manipur issue has two dimensions. The Manipur factor that divides the Nagas also. Now, if you look at the Naga insurgency is divided. Means if you look at the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, most of the leaders or the top leaders or the cadres are largely from the hill areas of Manipur, the Nagas of Manipur. So this is also one issue. So the Manipur factor has also to do with in this factional politics within the Naga insurgent politics. Then another thing is that what we have seen, just to conclude, is that in India, reorganization of states is an ongoing process. And now, if you look at, practically speaking, if you look at the so-called insurgency movement in the Northeast, is also actually the movement for separate states. Now, if you look at, practically speaking, most of the insurgent movement, except for a few, most of the insurgent movement are actually the movement for separate states. So now the main problem is in Manipur, because now when we talk about the integration of the Naga areas or to the so-called into a political and administrative unit. So now the problem is that, as we all in other states, we have seen reorganization. I mean, states were being reorganized one after another. Say, for example, UP was reorganized to facilitate the creation of Uttarakhand. Bihar was reorganized. Andhra Pradesh was also reorganized. There was not much problem. There was some movement, there was some violence, of course. But the problem in Manipur is very different. Why it is very different is that if you look at the geography, Manipur is a very, the hill areas comprises about 91% of the whole territory of Manipur. And the valley or the plain area is just about 9% of today's Manipur's territory. So this is the problem. So as a result of that, those who inhabit in the plain areas, they are worried that, and as a result of that, they are most opposed to the idea of integration of the so-called, the Naga areas. Suppose if this integration of the so-called Naga areas into an administrative unit, if that has to taken place, means at least about 70 to 80% of, or maybe up to, maybe more of the territory of Manipur has to be carved out. So in that case, Manipur will be just the small valley areas. So as a result of that, we find more opposition to these, the Naga integration in Manipur than in Assam or say in Arunachal Pradesh. So I think with this, I will stop here, Manish.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Singh, for comprehensively, laying out not only the historicity of the different accords and the agreements that have been signed over the years, and I think for any student who is studying negotiation literature, I think you really have added up to understanding the Naga peace negotiation from a negotiation literature of you, sort of telling that negotiation, after all, is an ongoing, dynamic, and imperfect process. One of the things that I would really come back later on during the Q&A is that the thing that I got out from your earlier parts of the presentation was also the specificity of each of the insurgencies in the Northeast, and how it is difficult to deal with them, and how lessons cannot be entirely learned from solving one insurgency and then use it to solve another insurgency. And that raises an issue in my mind, that whether it is at all profitable to, is the nomenclature Northeast insurgency is at all profitable in terms of looking at the different kind of insurgencies, under the umbrella called Northeast insurgency. So, but without again, spending too much time, I would like to get to the part where some of our esteemed invitees would like to make some short interventions, after which we can open the floor for a brief question in our session. First of all, if Mr. Hablikar is Shri Hablikar is there, Shri Hablikar, can you please unmute yourself and give your intervention, brief intervention? Mr. Hablikar?
Yeah. Firstly, let me thank both Dr. Patricia Mukhim and Mr. Singh for the cogent manner of their presentation of the subject. And I think it's very important that we understand the nitty-gritty of what Northeast India is all about, and why you have so much less focus on a very important strategic region of our country. And as was rightly said, the approach to the situation in the Northeast needs to be looked at in a very strategic manner, because it is not sufficiently enough to look at using some of the political tools to solve the problem. Now, when I used to deal with this particular subject when I was in service, and maybe I think I had a ringside view of what was going on, we were looking at what Dr. Singh mentioned about Schedule 6 and the Schedule 7 of the Constitution. When one has created a solution, the other could also have created a problem for it. How do you resolve the whole thing? Now, as I look at it from my personal experience, after having seen the Mizo Accord being signed, and also I've seen certain other developments. First is, why is the peace talks or the thing in Nagaland at a stage where it is today? There are 2 or 3 items that I would like to bring. One is, what is the ownership of the state government in the entire process? What is the ownership of the civil society? Thirdly, how does the situation on the ground get altered or sufficiently changed if, like what you rightly said, the government is not in a position to negotiate the broader terms of peace accord without understanding what are the milestones. You can't have a peace accord outside the spirit of the Constitution. I mean, until at such time the Constitution is not fully respected, you can't have any peace accord. I think most of the groups which have entered into the peace accord on the side of the government of India, they have realized this. So now the question is, that's the first one, constitutional part. What are the political issues that are involved? Thirdly, what are the constitutional issues that are involved? Now, for example, compared to the rest of the country today, the Constitution provides a major, incentive to the people of the Northeast region by giving them autonomous district councils and district councils, which were created prior to the promulgation of the Constitution to give them special status to protect their cultural and other rights. Now, how are these these institutions played any role in trying to mitigate the ground realities. The fourth one is the institutional mechanism that exists to monitor a ceasefire. We have two ceasefire monitoring groups, one that deals with the NSC and K, and the other one that deals with the NSC and IM. How empowered are the ceasefire groups? What is their responsibility? What is their accountability? And who is exactly there to either hold their hands to make their job efficient? And now we have certain areas of certain problem areas that when you talk of contiguous areas, how is it that the state of Assam, the state of Arunachal Pradesh, or the state of Manipur going to accede to a demand where they will be needed to cede some of their territorial portions to a new state that is coming up? So I think some of these things need to be looked at. Fortunately for us, as I would believe, what Professor Singh said, it's only a framework agreement, it's not an accord. And that only you take the next step when you begin to put constitutional clothing on the whole thing. Today, who is the man who ensures that the agreement with NSC and IM is working? Or who is the man who's going to get the others onto the same platform to ensure that we have a commonality of interest? So as far as I'm concerned, I think the state governments need also to be in the mix. After all, they are politically elected. They are responsible to their own legislature and their people. And through them, you have a whole host of other spokespersons involved. I think there are three issues here. Who takes the ownership? What are the constitutional positions that are there? And finally, how does the mechanism play out? I think the two ceasefire monitoring groups have not really stepped up to the plate or delivered where it is necessary. Now, with the government of India taking the lead in the entire thing, an impression is being given or being gained that the state governments do not have a role to play. As a result, the image, the visibility of the government of India is not seen in the manner it ought to have been seen. Because today, I think the state governments should not become bystanders, or witnesses to what is happening in their own territories, because the agreements do not seem to be becoming a way forward. I think these are some of the issues that I need to flag. There could be, people with different opinions, but this is what I said. I've seen this happening right from 1992 when I was posted in Shillong. I was there in Mizoram during the insurgency, and I've seen this. But I have a general feeling that these are some of the issues that we need to address. What is the way forward? That's important. We know the background, we know the history, we have learned our lessons, but are we in a position to do what is being done? And I think what letter the governor of Nagaland wrote and it became public has a lot of meaning in it. And I think we need to understand that he was trying to bring in a few home truths. So thank you very much. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Shri Avlikar. Thank you for your comments. And we'll move to the next distinguished intervention, and we will carry over with the interventions before I come back to the the speakers to offer their remarks. Can we have Shri Jitendra Ojha to unmute and give his intervention? Shri Jitendra Ojha.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Yes, I had a very brief and good exposure to Northeast and lived in, I can say, both Nagaland and Manipur for 3.5 years. So I appreciate the issues which Professor Singh has highlighted. I feel in last 2 decades, I shall not get into anything which has already been covered, but I feel in last 2 decades plus, there has been far more greater psychological integration of whole of Northeast with mainland India that is visible because people are there. Of course, this problem is something which is identity driven. I had specialized once in this kind of, I should not say insurgencies because there's no serious insurgency as of now in Northeast, in my perception. But wherever these identity driven issues are there, it's very difficult to address, very difficult to accommodate. And I feel that some of the existing governance structures are such they need to be invented upon, since we are talking about way forward. These need to be invented upon. And secondly, regarding ceasefire, etc., I feel that unless and until this ambience of trust is not built, not only the trust between Nagas and central government, but between trust among various Naga tribes, trust among various civil society groups, and trust between Nagas and other tribes who are there in Northeast, especially Manipur, and Metis, who are a very important factor. Unless and until some trust is not built, I suppose it will be very difficult for us to have an endurable solution. And from the point of view of national security, I look at issues. It will be something which will keep on troubling us. So I believe the most important factor would be to build trust among these groups and then go for some innovation, because the integration of Naga inhabited areas of Myanmar is something very, very difficult to talk about. Or even integration of Manipur and Nagaland, Naga inhabited areas are very difficult to talk about. So we may have to discover some innovation where legitimate aspirations of people are met, and all the elements who are involved in armed kind of conflict, how to accommodate them. These are solutions which we have to look at innovatively. But I assume that the element of secessionism, which was manifest prior to 1998 or continued in some form even later on, that has certainly dwindled. I hope I'm not too unrealistic. So with these remarks, I would love to listen to more experts and what they have to ask. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Sri Jitendra Oja, for your interventions. They're really relevant. Now, can I have the pleasure of inviting Sri G.K. Pillai? Sir, if you could unmute yourself and offer your brief interventions.
Oh, can you hear me? Can I be heard?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't expect to speak, but for the benefit of especially the students who are there listening, I was one of those people who directly negotiated with the NSC-NIM right from 1997 onwards till 2001, and then again in 2009 to 2011 when I was the Union Home Secretary. Two issues which were earlier raised, I just thought quickly I'll just comment and then come to a couple of points which I would raise. In the government, we've always have this dilemma whether when you have two or three different groups who are fighting against the government of India, if one of them wants to come for talks, do you talk with them or you wait till everybody is ready to come for talks? That's what happened even with the Bodos, with the Bodo Liberation Tigers. I was also involved with the negotiations creating the Bodoland Territorial Council. The NDFB were just not willing to come. We gave them all the opportunity, but they said unless sovereignty is given to them, they are not willing to come for talks. So we finally had to leave them out and said that you've lost an opportunity. So when the NSC-NIM, which was in one sense the most dominant group among the Naga insurgent groups at that time, when they expressed a certain willingness to come for talks, they always come for talks when there is enough pressure from the security forces. In 97, we grabbed that opportunity. And I think looking in hindsight, I think it was good. It was good for the people of Nagaland. It was good in the sense that we started the negotiations. And if you see the actual killings which have taken place between 1997 and 2020, I think the killings have actually come down drastically, almost like it's down by 95% from what it was pre-1997. So to that extent, it gives a little bit more space for civil society to be a little bit more vocal. And I think post-1997, you've seen civil society also being a little vocal on that. Just a small correction for Pat in terms of the interlocutor. The other interlocutor who we changed in 2009 and brought in R.S. Pandey, the former Chief Secretary of Nagaland, R.S. Pandey, he also did all his negotiations in India, unlike Mr. Padma. And I think to an extent, almost 90% to 95% of most of the issues raised by the NSE and IM during the talks had been settled. The real issues which were not settled was basically the issue with Manipur in terms of, I think we brought in shared sovereignty, which managed to convince them on that shared sovereignty. We were also able to convince them even not to look for the larger Naga limb, which they were wanting to talk about. But the issue on which the talks actually broke down was actually on the issue of autonomy for the Naga-dominated hill districts of Manipur, where we had there were certain differences of opinion with the Chief Minister of Manipur, Mr. Ibobi Singh, who was the Chief Minister at that time, and we were not able to. I'm talking about 2011, not able to, shall I say, clinch the deal. Almost, we are almost reached even on autonomy about 95% agreement, but 5% on the small bits which we couldn't finally do it. There were other political reasons for him with state elections coming up and so on. But I think the 2015 framework agreement, I think, is what Pat says, I think is correct. It was primarily because ISAC-SU was terminally ill, and you needed, we wanted some agreement before he died, where his signature was on a document which would give legitimacy to their whole agitation and their negotiations with the government of India. So in fact, after the agreement was actually, just before it was ready to be signed, it was actually taken to the ICU, where he was, ISAC-SU was in the ICU, and he signed it literally in the intensive care unit. And therefore you have the NSE and IM, that the framework agreement has both ISAC-SU and MUIVA's signature, whereas today it will have only MUIVA's signature because ISAC-SU is no more. It's an NSE and M rather than IM, because the Semas, who was one tribe in Nagaland, needed to be part of this, unless MUIVA was a Thankul Naga from Manipur. I'm not going into the history, but I think one of the developments which has taken place, on which perhaps the speakers could also, is actually in 2019, the issue when government of India took up the abrogation of Article 370 of the Constitution and making Jammu and Kashmir a state into 2 union territories, which I think was totally illegal step, and the Supreme Court should have struck it down by now. They haven't yet started the discussions, even though it's more than a year. That, I think, put a lot of, what shall I say, doubt in the minds of even the NSE and IM, etc. That, look, you promised us a state, what is the guarantee that tomorrow you will not take away the state? You promised us something, even some certain constitutional changes. If you are going to have, if there's no sanctity to that, then I think a certain element of trust, and the fact that the shared sovereignty is no longer shared sovereignty, it's an overwhelming federal sovereignty rather than the state sovereignty, is, I think, has led to a certain element of what I would call as loss of trust between the government of India and the NSE and IM, which is why they are seeking much more, shall I say, more definitive guarantees so that you cannot amend it by a further constitutional or other agreement, etc. And that is a fear which is there in many of their issues, in the issues that are coming. In terms of Manipur itself, I think the real issue is, if you want, even if some partial agreement from the Manipur government in terms of increased autonomy, is what Dr. Amarjeet Singh mentioned, with 70 to 80% of the land, and people in the hill districts can go and buy land in the valley, but the people in the valley cannot go and buy land in the hill districts. It's a totally, it's a lopsided view of people of one state. And if you want everybody to be one, then why can't people in the valley also buy land in the hill districts? I think it's created that element of where people will be saying that for Manipur, you will have to find some sort of an incentive for them to come and join the agreement. Otherwise, it's 60% to 60% of the population being Meiteis and so on. No political leader in Manipur would be willing to sign on to a deal where he feels that the Meiteis have been shortchanged. So you have to find that little bit of land. Maybe an issue of some land, some portions of the land they can be up to 5% or 10% of the land in the hill areas can be leased, or on long-term lease, etc., to people in the valley and so on. You have to give the people, the political people in Manipur, some sort of incentive to be able to come on to this agreement, because otherwise they will find it very politically very hard to come to this agreement. It's a difficult stage now, but you have to manage it. I think you see, if you have an interlocutor who's also the governor, I think you have to be a little bit more, shall I say, cautious before you make certain statements. If you're an interlocutor, you can afford to make some statements. If you're only the governor, you can make it. But when you're governor and interlocutor, you are caught between two. And I think Ravi would have been advised much better to either stick on as interlocutor or stick on as governor and leave the interlocutor to somebody else to be able to do it. Because you can't be governor and interlocutor. I think it was a mistake in one sense of the government of India to have made him both the interlocutor and the governor, because they're two completely different roles. And to that extent, to an extent that he has lost a little bit of the trust of the NSE and IM, it's therefore a little bit more difficult. And you've seen the last round of negotiations in Delhi, where he didn't participate at all in the negotiations. And actually went back to Nagaland. So it's a difficult situation, but I'm sure that it's possible to, shall I say, reconstruct and build upon it to come to a final settlement. These are just my comments at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the intervention. It's really, I think, open up a lot of points for discussion. Before I get back to the speakers for their remarks, because there's a huge student body which is I can see in the attendance, mostly from our own institution, but also I see that some students from other universities have also joined. So. For the benefit of the students, what I will do is, before I get back to the speakers, I will open up the question and answer session. Maybe I will take 3 questions first and then allow the speakers to respond along with the interventions that has been made till now. So for all the participants out there, this is how we do. We either you raise your hand, which you can see on the top bar. There's a raise hand signal. So you can raise your hand and then I will unmute you and you can ask your question. If you are not able to do so, you can write your questions on the chat box and I can read out for you. So anyone who has a question can raise your hand by using the raise your hand bar. Any questions? Okay, so what I will do now is while the student or the participants are ruminating on what they would like to raise to the speakers, I would give the floor to the speakers to respond to the number of interventions, both remarks and questions that have been put to them till now. So let me start with Ms. Patricia Mukhim. Ma'am, you may unmute yourself and.
Okay. See, I forgot to bring this issue, which is a very important issue, to the fore, which also needs to be discussed dispassionately. And that is the issue of the continuance of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in the Northeastern region. I think this has got to go. If you're negotiating peace, if you're trying to integrate the Northeast, psychologically with the rest of India, and the rest of India doesn't have Armed Forces Special Powers Act, even in those Maoist hit areas, then why should we continue to have this colonial law in the region? I think it's very important for government of India to understand that it cannot treat its periphery, differently than it does other states of India. This has caused so much torment, so much torture to especially the women folk of the Northeast. And I would be failing in my duty if I do not raise this. My plea to government of India and to all those who sincerely feel that this region needs to be emotionally and psychologically integrated is to remove this contentious act. And coming to the intervention made by, I cannot remember his name, about whether the ceasefire monitoring committee is empowered to, to do its work. Going by what you see in Nagaland today, this ceasefire monitoring committee does not really seem to, to be able to control extortion, to control the movement of people with arms. So I really don't know what they are monitoring and why they are not able to do what they are asked to do. And about the involvement of the state governments of Manipur and Nagaland, which I think is very important. The involvement of the two governments is crucial, but I think both of them have to be involved as non-partisan negotiators, because the government of Nagaland cannot be under the, cannot be committed to the NSCN-IM demands. It has to stand on its own feet as an elected constitutional authority, and so too the government of Manipur. Then the contiguous areas integration, I think that is ruled out. You cannot at this time start another civil war in the region, because none of the states are willing to concede even 1 kilometer of land. So whatever settlement will come has to be within the framework of the constitution, greater autonomy for those areas, better development, because we know for a fact that the hill areas of Manipur are very poorly developed. I visited especially Ukhrul and the Mao area several times and have seen how disparate these areas are. So let's think of better development packages and greater autonomy on deciding what to have where. These areas need to have institutions of excellence. They don't have anything at all at the moment. And if you look at the migration, the largest number of migrants from Manipur come from the hills, and they're engaged in some of the most not unworthy kind of occupations, So that itself tells you how poorly developed the hills of Manipur are, and we really need to do something about that. Then, as far as the demands of the NSCN-IM, which are stuck today, are concerned, which is a separate constitution and a separate flag, I think these demands have been left open just to delay the process, to delay the final signing of the agreement. And from what the Gaumbura body has been saying in Nagaland, they said we don't need a separate constitution. We are already a state, so why should we are already a state within the Union of India? Why should we have a separate constitution? So if you ask me, I think there's very little now to actually delay the peace process. I mean, the signing of the peace accord, people want to call it the framework agreement. To me, it seems all the same. It's just a matter of semantics. So if we don't do it now, we cannot do it for. But Mr. Pillai, who is very knowledgeable about this region, said, it's important to get as many stakeholders as possible into the process, because leaving it to just one stakeholder, and now especially after the death of Mr. Isaac Su, the whole NSA and IM is run by just the M, by Mr. Muiva and his group. So this has to be understood in the larger context. And there is, of course, a huge trust deficit among the tribes today. Now, the Zeliang Rong group has formed its, they now have their own group, and they're not aligned with the aspirations of the Tangkhul Nagas. So I don't know how you're going to bring in all these disparate groups and bring things to a point where they will all agree to signing a common accord. I think with this, I will leave it to Professor Singh to say the rest.
Thank you, ma'am. Now over to Dr. Singh. Sir, you have to unmute. Sir.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
Morning. Thank you very much. And then, I mean, it was a very. I have also listened to the various important points that has been raised by other, and as I also agree with what Sri G.K. Pillai sir has said, that now this issue, the Naga issue, has reached a very difficult stage. It's a very, very difficult situation. And as I have said in the beginning also, now, so many years of, of struggle, so it's a, so now I think that now there has to be, something has to be done, in order to resolve this, problem. So, but the challenges are, there are lots of challenges, there are difficulties. So now I would just want to just highlight two issues. One is the involvement of the state government. The number two is the issue of this autonomy. Now, as far as I understand, there is a especially in the Northeast, as I have seen, is that many of these autonomy demands or the insurgency movements, in this kind of situations, the role of the states in the Northeast seems to be very, very limited. Because you see, for example, when any say organization demanding say something, say sixth schedule or a separate state, I mean, most of these organizations, they want to bypass the state. They want to bypass the state, and then they just directly they want to deal with the central government. So this has been going on in the Northeast for a number of years. Because now even in the so-called this autonomous district council in the sixth scheduled areas, so now many of this council have been demanding that there should be direct funding from the central government, so the state should not be involved. But you see, the state government is also very, very important. And you see, the central government is very important, no doubt, but at the same time, we cannot ignore the importance of the state government in dealing this kind of ethnic issues. So that is the reason why, of course, it's a difficult, I mean, it's a very, very difficult one. The parties involved may not even like the state government to be part of any negotiations. I know that. But having seen various problems, various issues, and now the peace process not getting anywhere. So in this kind of situation, with especially the center should rethink its strategy, and it try to bring the state government. So as for example, Naga issue cannot be solved without the involvement of the Assam government, Arunachal government, and the Manipur government. So we cannot bypass these three state governments. So therefore, we need to, and the center, whatsoever the center, the representatives of the government of India, should negotiate and discuss with all these three state government. So I think that is very, very important. I think, I mean, there might be some, some discussion, but it should be an open discussion where the states are being involved. So that is the reason. And now, why these states, say for example, in Manipur, what is going on? It's not only about Manipur, is that, say for example, if you go to the, in some areas, so the state government, the state government, say, even when this negotiation ceasefire is going on, sometimes in some areas, the role of the state government seems to be very, very limited. So therefore, I think that we should respect the state. State should play a very, very important role. So therefore, there should be a way forward to involve the state's government, especially Manipur, Arunachal, and Assam. And then now, as everybody has also mentioned about the issue of the stumbling block, the Manipur is a crucial one. Now, if you look at the various, the so-called Naga areas, if you look at the Naga areas, which is unofficially or officially recognized as the Naga areas, many of these areas are today already autonomous regions, except, say, Arunachal Pradesh. In Arunachal Pradesh, there is no provision of the 6th schedule or any kind of autonomy. Say in Manipur, say for example, say the so-called the Naga inhabited areas are already autonomous regions. And this autonomy or this district level autonomy, so we also see this kind of autonomy in, say, in various parts of Assam, in the hills of Assam, in the plains of Assam. So likewise, the 91% or the 90% of the land in Manipur is already an autonomous region. And now the solution to the Naga problem, especially when it comes to Manipur, is also on the issue of this autonomy. And in my view is that, so therefore, in any kind of this future negotiation and discussion, it should focus on the kind of autonomy, because the autonomy need not be, within the so-called the 6th schedule, because you see in India, there are different kinds of autonomy. There are 6 autonomies which are given under the 6th schedule, say for example, in, say, Bodo areas or in Karbi Anglong or in many areas of Meghalaya. But there are also autonomy arrangements, say, as for example, in the Darjeeling areas of West Bengal and in Ladakh and other areas. So therefore, I think what I feel is that this kind of autonomy, or giving some kind of limited autonomy, I think this is the, most viable option to resolve the Naga issue. So in that context, my suggestion or my belief or my understanding is that there is a need to involve the states, the surrounding states. That is a must. Because now the problem is that, so one group, one militant group may not like the Manipur government to involve, another may not like to, so that kind of thing. Everybody in the Northeast, those groups, they want to negotiate only with the New Delhi. They don't want to negotiate with the state. So, but I think that is wrong. So therefore, we need to bring these states, the states Manipur or Assam or Meghalaya. So some of these states should be involved in any kind of negotiation. I think that is very, very important. And the resolution of the conflict, I think we should need to focus on this kind of autonomy, some kind of district level autonomy. Say for example, the Naga inhabited districts in Manipur are already, they are already getting some kind of limited district level autonomy. So the focus should be on this kind of things. Thank you very much, Monish.
Thank you, sir. 2 of my colleagues have questions. Dr. Nandakishore, can you please unmute yourself and put your question forward?
Yeah, one is to either of the panelists. What role China has in the northeast of India?
Okay.
And the next question is from Dr. Anand V. Anand, please unmute yourself.
My question is regarding the funding of these Naga insurgent groups. and over the period of time, how it has evolved and how it has basically played a role in the negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand and Dr. Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore, for your questions. And are there any questions from other participants that you would like to put to the speakers? Yes, Mr. Hebliker, please go ahead.
Just a quick point. Due to the number of parliamentarians who hail from the Northeast, I think these parliamentarians have a major role to play, being members of the upper house and the lower house. Is there time now opportune to look at increasing the number of parliamentarians of the Northeastern region so that there is more way of representation? I think today we have what, 27, 28 MPs from the region. And looking at the importance that we are giving to the region under various government's policies, I think the members of parliament also need to play a major role. So I would like some of my colleagues from the Northeast and from among the persons who spoke to just share their views on this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Besides these questions, taking the opportunity of being the moderator, I would like to put across one question each to the speakers. To Patricia, ma'am, first. Ma'am, I've read your work many a times, and I also am aware that you often argue and speak about doing away or sort of speaking against the over romanticization of Northeast and the kind of work that you refer to, because you have written even your book on an issue where the question that I had put in the beginning, which was not only of geographical terms, but also on other aspects also, how do we account for the periphery within the periphery and the marginalized within the marginalized, So that is my question. The question to Dr. Singh, again, from what he had brought out, and I think this is something that is already debated, not only, whenever Northeast as a subject area is taken up, either in works that are to do with literature, or works that are to do with sociology, or works that are to do with geopolitics and strategy, is the use of the word Northeast itself, and to move away from the monolithic notion of the Northeast. And even as I mentioned in the beginning, has it been beneficial from a conflict resolution and peace process point of view to continue having a debate on under the umbrella term called Northeast insurgency? Or how do we approach this in a pedagogical way? When I am teaching to my students or I'm talking to them, when does this issue of Northeast as a monolithic thing comes in? Because at one time it helps us identify the geographical uniqueness of a certain area, and it helps us in the pedagogy, but at the same time it has its deficiencies also. That is my question. So I will now leave the floor for the speakers. Ma'am, you can go first.
Yeah. So what role does China have to play in funding, training of insurgent groups of the Northeast? Sorry to use that word again, Monish. In 1966, Mr. Muiva and others in his team went to China to be trained. They were trained there for 6 months, and I think it was a very, very good piece of training, especially about medical care of the insurgents. However, one of the persons who had gone with him, when he came back, he just decided that he was going to give up his fight and to join the mainstream, to become another citizen. We know that China continues to send weapons, but those weapons are not sent free of cost. And a lot of the money for buying weapons is from Indian government money, which is why a retired bureaucrat of Nagaland once said, he once proposed at a meeting of the National Security Advisory Board, that the people of the Northeast, the tribes who are exempted from paying income tax, should now be taxed because a lot of that money is going into buying weapons. And we don't know about that because we are not taxed. So that's the ground reality as it is. And coming to your question, Manish, about over-romanticization, I agree that, for too long a time, we have lived as victims, and when I read this Hannah Arendt's book on the topic on violence, where she speaks about the moral authority of victimhood, I think we are all living that. We all, on the one hand, we are victimizers of sorts. We victimize others who are minorities in our respective states, and then when we go out of the states, we act like victims, and even within the states, we act like victims, saying that we are not getting enough resources, but we are not even able to account for the resources that come in. Consistently, we are not monitoring and evaluating those monies that have come in from the government of India. And it is very sad that the reason why people from the Northeast always want to be on the side of the government that's ruling in Delhi is because they want the money without accountability. The governments in Delhi also, if it is a friendly government in Assam, in Manipur, in Nagaland, they will not be too careful about monitoring how the money is spent. So these are evils that need to be overcome. And speaking about periphery within the periphery, we always, in the Northeast, we tend to speak about how we are ignored by the national media, how the national media does not give enough importance to the floods in Assam, to that huge oil in that Oil India refinery. But in the same state, we tend to be very, very urbanized. Our media is also largely urbanized. We don't go beyond the capital cities. So let's not talk about victimization anymore. I think now we have come of age and we are all, I think, standing on the same footing. So, yeah. And then, the crafting of words like Northeast, they become part of our consciousness, part of our narrative. Nobody wants to say anything differently. And we just continue with the stereotype. So I don't know who is going to take the first call and say, we don't want to be called as a region anymore. We don't want to be classed as a region anymore because we have our specific nuances of governance. Each state has its own strengths, its own weaknesses, its own potential, its own resources, which need to be used in specific ways. And therefore, each state needs a separate look from the center. We can't class the whole Northeast or have a Northeast tourism policy or a Northeast industrial policy. It doesn't work. I think it's time now, but it's time that the state governments take this call. And most of the times it's the state governments that don't do their work. Even in terms of applying AFSPA, many times if you go back and read who are the people who demand AFSPA, it's the state governments. Many times, Mr. Tarun Gogoi, for instance, any threat or any intimidation like that, he will write to New Delhi to ask for more forces and extend AFSPA and so on and so forth. So our own state governments also have a lot of work to do. Thank you very much, Manish.
Over to Dr. Singh.
Yeah, Manish, thank you very much. So very briefly, I will start with what you talk about, what you asked about the Northeast. Now, I mean, what is interesting is that if you recall the State Reorganization Commission, the report, and it was very interesting is that if you see this report, they says that this was a 1955 report. and it lays down the criteria for the reorganization of states in India. And one of the recommendation given by the State Reorganization Commission was that there should be only one state in the Northeast. They say that there should be only one state, that is Assam. They even talk about merging Manipur and Tripura with Assam. So this was this, with this background, what I would like to say is that now this has to do with the development in each of the states of the Northeast region. Now, say for example, there are a large number of people from many of these states going to various parts of the country. For example, in Karnataka or in Tamil Nadu or Kerala. But whereas none of these northeastern states are not able to, attract, say for example, good number of students, say let's say from other states. So therefore, now this idea of Northeast, as it is not only, it doesn't have not only the geographical connotation, but also it has also to do with the level of development in various, the units or the various states in the Northeast. So this is something, and now if you recall, so if you recall and if you see the various criteria that was set by the State Reorganization Commission, which talks about, say, financial viability, administrative viability, and then historical factor, and like that. And if you look at, as the other speaker have also said, many of these states, so therefore are now today they are dependent on the central. So therefore, I think this notion of Northeast and then the Northeast, and then while this the smaller states, and so this has to do with the geography and the level of development in each of these states in the region. So this is something that which I think we need to look at from the level of development, not only from the geographical point of view. So therefore you come, say for example, I'll give you why the Northeast has become so popular and the state have become so unpopular. Say for example, say in 1971 or 73. The Northeastern Council was set up. Then around that time, Northeastern Hill University was set up. Then after some time, Northeastern Regional Institute of Science and Technology somewhere in Arunachal Pradesh. And then somewhere in Assam also there were Northeast Institution of, so that, this administrative intervention or the political intervention also have led to this situation. So the Northeastern Council in 1971, then somewhere in 2002 or 2005, the Ministry of the Development of the Northeast. So this is the context. But what I feel is that, development. So this is the development, and many of these states in the Northeast are not able to do that. So this is something which I feel. And then regarding this, the China factor, as one, I will suggest that there is a book. This is a book just recently written. It's almost a year or so. It's known as Puknamin. It is about Nagaland, and it is written by one Hungyo Sebastian. It's a very nice book, and this has an account of this book is based on interviews with the top Naga insurgents leaders, including Muiba, Isaac, Su, and all that. So this book has a very interesting account, the problems they faced when they were going from the Northeast to the China and all that, all kinds of that. And suddenly why the Chinese governments, decided not to give them support. So I think this book gives a very interesting account, because otherwise many of the writings are based on, say, 1960s some records. But this book, I think this Puknamin, written by Hungyo and Sebastian, it's a very, very interesting book which gives a very detailed account, the problem they face, the challenges they face, and then suddenly in the 70s, and the Chinese stop giving, help to them. So that kind of story, this book gives a lots of. And then regarding funding, of course, as we know that, many of the northeastern insurgents groups are not very well funded. Say, for example, one of my friend, when he was in NIAS, we did a study of the finance of the LTTE in Sri Lanka. It was a very well financed organization funded from across the world, but it is not so in the case of many of these northeastern insurgent organizations. So therefore, their funding is only from the local, through, so except for the NSA and IM, most of the insurgents group, so that is the sources of funding is, I must say that, except for a very few groups are not very well funded. So they are, and they don't have any organization, from abroad to give them funds, so it's not, so therefore, so the funding is, so therefore many of this has to rely on the common people for, funds. So, and the other issue about the leadership in the Northeast, it's a challenge. And say, as for example, now the challenge is also to do with the the intensity of this ethnic identity politics. So therefore now there must be at least about, say, at least there are more than 20 elected member of parliament in the parliament. So at one point of time, but now unfortunately what we have seen, I mean, except for the then the late P.S. Satma, the others, we have not come across that kind of leadership, and the leadership has also been hampered by this, the ethnic identity politics. Say, for example, say let's say 2 MP from, let's say, X state, and when they come to Delhi, they don't talk to each other, and there are political divisions. So that is there. So leadership, I mean, it's very, very important, and we want a good and very, a very dynamic, parliamentarian from the Northeast, and we want a united leadership. Say there are, say, 25, 27 MPs, if they can be, united, and but that is not happening. That is not happening as far as I understand. There are, internal divisions, and so and then there are, party affiliations. So get hampered, But I must say that the late P.S. Satma, he was a, great leader. But we hope to see more, good leaders, good and dynamic, who can stand for the region, for the states of the Northeast. But I think, that is very, very crucial, and then that is what we wanted. We wanted a good leadership from this region. Moniz?
Thank you, sir. And I agree, and all the participants will agree with me that we stand more enlightened on the many issues impacting the region, and also specifically on the issue that we have deliberated on today, which is the Naga peace negotiation. And before I ask my colleague to propose a formal vote of thanks, I would request my head of department, Professor Arvind Kumar, sir, if you can unmute yourself.
There's no denying the fact that it was really a very good session. I think we have learned quite a lot from these two perspectives on a very complex subject. I personally thank Ms. Patricia Mukhim, and also my very good friend, Dr. Amarjeet Singh, for sharing their ideas. We have learned quite a lot from both of you, and we look forward to interacting with you on this very important area in geopolitics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite my colleague, Dr. Anand B, to propose the formal vote of thanks. Anand, over to you.
Thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity to pose this vote of thanks. So, my good afternoon to all who have gathered for this virtual discussion. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our respected Vice Chancellor of MAHE, Lieutenant General Dr. M.D. Venkatesh, for taking time out of his busy schedule to deliver the presidential address. I would like to deeply thank the distinguished speakers, Professor Patricia Mukhim and Professor M. Amarjeet Singh, who have provided us valuable insights into the Naga peace negotiations, which is extremely significant from the standpoint of India's national unity and security point of view. I'd also like to thank the distinguished invitees, including Sri P.M. Heblikar, Sri Jitendra Kumar Ojha, and Sri G.K. Pillai for their perceptive interventions. I would like to especially thank Professor Arvind Kumar, Professor and Head of Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, MAHE, for providing us this opportunity to listen to these two eminent speakers, as well as guiding us in organizing this panel discussion. I would also like to express my gratitude to Dr. Monish for moderating this panel discussion. I'm grateful to my other colleagues as well for their support in organizing this webinar. Finally, I would like to extend my thanks to all the other members of the audience, including our students, participants from other institutes of MAHE, as well as those from other institutes outside the university, for their active participation, which has basically made this webinar an interesting experience. So thanks to all for making this interaction a success.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. And with this, we come to the end of this discussion, and I thank one and all for making this a success, and have a very good day to one and all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Monish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
We learned a lot from the other interventions, no? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, Professor Amarjeet.
Thank you.